Welcome back to the Culture Based Podcast. We're so glad that you're here. I'm Dustin. He's Blake,
Hi.
and we are. Hey, Blake. We're we're excited to get this thing going with y'all today. Topic that we're super passionate about, and one that I know we get questions about all the time. And so we're going to tackle how generational differences can affect your bottom line. And I know as leaders, we're all concerned at the end of the day about that P&L statement. We want to know where we're at. We want to look at the data. We want to see how we're progressing along in business. And so when our financial person comes to us and hands us that statement, we want to be able to look at that and see what's affecting that. And some of the things that are affecting that are generational differences. So we're going to dive into that in just a second. But before we do, I want to remind you, if you're listening on any audio podcast platforms, to leave us a 5-star review. That super helps us get this content out further. If you have any comments or episodes that you'd like to hear us talk about, you can drop those in the comments or in the ratings for the podcast there as well. If you're watching on YouTube, hello there.
Hi.
Good to see you. We'd love for you to like, subscribe, ring the bell on this video, and that way you'll get notified every time we drop new content. We're gonna start. Actually, by the time this comes out, we'll have already started dropping some clips in the second half of the week for a little bite-sized nuggets of these episodes. So yeah, love for you to follow along on YouTube as well. For all of our social media engagement, you can follow us at The Culture Base, BASE. We're on Instagram, we're on LinkedIn, we're on Facebook, all the places that you want to be. We're there too. Come say hi. And then lastly, if there's anything that we can do to help you and your company as we help leaders know what they're about, show where they're going, and develop a scalable team to get there, you can contact us directly at theculturebase.com. While you're there, go ahead on and click over to the Think Tanks link, culturebase.com, and click on the Think Tanks link. We have our next Think Tank session coming up very soon on August 31st. So it'll be the last Thursday of every month. We're going to keep it at an hour. And actually, what we're talking about today, Blake, is what we're going to talk about in our next Think Tank. So that's super exciting. So think of today as like a little bit of a prequel into the conversation that you'll get to be a part of at our next Think Tank. I think that's everything for the business. How you doing, bud?
Good. Doing great.
Good.
And I think it's good that we're hitting this topic now before we go into that think tank, because the think tank just gives us so much more opportunity to dive into more tangible items. How do we do this? How can we, those are where we can really dig into how. This is where we can dig into why, and we'll hit hows and stuff. But
yeah,
this topic specifically, like generational differences, how it affects your bottom line, but it's just such a supercharged issue. And so before we get into all this today, I'm pleading with you, listener, to come with a fresh and a curious perspective. Okay. I know these damn kids these days. I get it. Okay. I get it. I've heard it.
Looks like one.
What's that?
It's because Blake still looks like one.
Yeah. This is not freshly shaven. Okay. It was freshly shaven in 2020. Okay.
This
so
is
this is
just trying to grow a beard for a couple years, Blake.
Yeah. No shave, never. And yeah. So anyway, I just am pleading with you to come with curious perspectives here, because you're going to get a lot farther if you're able to open your eyes to these differences and not see them from the horrible perspectives of like, well, what's wrong with these young generations today? And I don't know why I'm speaking in that voice. Like, that's just what I apparently think older people are yelling at us. But coming curiously, because like there are differences. Like to be like, oh no, sir, ma'am, they're the same that they've always been. They're not. You're right there. They're not. Okay. Our coming to age, 30, 40 years ago used to be around 18 to 19 years old for both male and female. We're up near 30s. That's different. To act like it's the same is stupid. Okay. It's okay. And those coming to age things are like buying a house or starting a family or really engaging in a career. That's a lot of those things that we were doing a lot earlier years ago. Okay. So, yeah, there are differences, but I think that also we miss out on the power of generations when we just walk in with those negative assumptions first. Okay.
Mm.
This makes me think about Apollo 11. Okay. That the mission where
That's the one where they landed.
it's the one where they landed. John F. Kennedy said, I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal that before the decade's out, we're going to get to the moon and we're going to return home safely to the earth. That was the big
Right.
mission that he put forth that he never actually got to see.
Right. Some people think they never even went there. Some people think they just saw a
Yep.
soundstage.
Just not this podcast. That's not what this
I'm
one is.
I'm not saying either way. I just want to
I know.
acknowledge it because I know that's where people's brains are going to go when you start talking about Apollo 11. Oh, did it really happen?
Oh, he's so fooled. Well, even if it didn't, great story here. Okay. So
It
just
is a really
enjoy
good
the
story.
fantasy and fiction in your
Yeah,
head.
let's just go on the journey with us for a second. Let's
Just
all pretend that we
imagine we
actually
did get to the moon. Okay.
imagine it.
Just imagine. Um, the thing that is crazy here about this, like we were a B rate space program when it came against Russia. Russia was leaps and bounds. Every time we were like, hey, we should try to, Russia got there like way quicker than we could. And, you know, I talk a lot about in my book, Apollo 1 scenario, and I'm not even going to get into that. But what's crazy is the Americans actually beat Russia to the moon, even if it's fiction in your head. Okay. Um, beat them to the moon. We got back. We completed that mission, which is amazing. But you know what's even crazier about all that? The average age of mission control was 24 to 26 years old.
Yeah.
What? Like, we
Yeah.
can't get 24s and 26-year-olds to clean their room anymore. But they got to the moon and back? Like, come on, please. This is just crazy. And yeah, we hear these generations are entitled, they're not loyal, they want instant gratification, they've got feelings, right? Well, the thing is we've got to just take a breath for a second, because there's a lot of differences happening today that have brought these generations to be where they are today. Okay.
Yeah.
They didn't get there by themselves. They got there
Mm.
from the parenting they received. And I know everyone just got like real defensive. Like, you don't talk about my parenting style. It was different. It was better than my parents. All right. I'm not fighting you on this. I'm just telling you that this is one of the most unparented generations or single parented generations that we've ever experienced. Okay. And that
Yeah.
being millennials and Gen Zs. And we'll dig into what those are here in a second, because I think it's important. But we're coming to a place that in the next 10 years, those generations are going to make up 74 to 75% of our workforce. And then Gen Alpha is coming right after that. And we're going to be completely about these mindsets. And if you don't go in with a fresh and curious perspective, it's going to be a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if you're still listening and Blake hasn't turned this off yet, I love it. Yeah, I think that's going to be the most. If you can get on board with what Blake is just saying, or you can at least agree to lean in a little bit, then I think you're going to really get a lot out of today's episode. But I think, like Blake was saying, it's important for us before we get into this conversation, because if you're like me and you fall somewhere like in between or like really close to a line of a generational break, you often get in these conversations with your friends while you're out hanging out or at the pool or having coffee together, and you're like, am I a millennial or am I Gen Z? Am I Gen X? And like baby boomers are like the only ones who really know who they are. Like for certain. They're like, oh yeah, boom boom. That's me.
Boom,
Um, boom boom. Boom boom. So let's just break down real quick what years we're referring to and the phrases that we're using, so that as we get into this conversation today and on the think tank, you can kind of understand what area and what age gap we're talking about here. So boomers or baby boomers, right? Right after that greatest generation boomers are 1946 to 1964. So if you're my age or around about my age, my parents were born in that gap. My parents definitely boomers. Gen X 1965 to 1980. So when we refer to the Gen X, we're talking usually about children of the 70s. And then millennials, or also referred to as Gen Y, 1981 to 1996. This is where Blake and I fall into. And I got to tell you, I fought that for a long time because of the negative connotations associated with millennials.
Oh yeah.
But unfortunately, that's where we're at. So I'll refer to myself as a Gen Y until Blake makes you understand how great millennials actually are. And then the real lazy bunch. I'm just kidding. The young bucks. Just kidding. I know I'm going to disprove it. The young bucks, Gen Zs, the zebras, 1997 to 2010. 1997 to 2010. And if you're asking what about 2011 and up, most of those aren't working yet. They're 13 or under.
Gen Alpha. Yeah. And I think, like, obviously I know you were joking by that statement, but what's interesting about Gen Zs is over 13% of them are already reporting being self-employed. Interesting.
I don't know if I find that number to be high or low.
I think it's very high.
Really?
Very high.
I think in my gut it feels low to me, but that's because I'm in that world. I'm in that self-employment world, and I know a lot of friends of mine that are in that world as well. So I guess for me it seems a little low, but yeah, I guess in the grand scheme of things it is high.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
their age is, 15 to whatever, 23 or something right now. I mean, my math's bad right there, but they're young, and 13%. And we can all be like, well, that's because they're making money on YouTube and selling foot pictures and doing all these things. And I get that, but guess what? They're making money and providing for themselves.
I gotta hang on. What are they selling?
Foot pictures.
Did you say foot pictures?
Yeah.
People sell pictures of their feet online?
Yes, they do. Let's move along.
Okay. I'm gonna have to dig into that one later.
I don't think I would.
I'm not going to actually, but that sounds weird enough for me to be curious. Okay, so Blake's alluded to a couple times, and we're gonna point you to this resource at the end. But Blake did write a book on culture called Uncultured, and he has a couple chapters in here in the middle of the book about generational differences. And as I was rereading it again this week, because I've definitely read it before, was he makes a statement in the book that generational differences have evolved to tribalism. And when I read that, I thought, okay, is this we're putting on war paint now and stripping down to loincloths and attacking each other? That's what I imagine. So, Blake, what is tribalism? How did we get there? And is it good or bad for business in these generational differences?
Yeah, very bad. I would say the tribalism is it's us versus them. It's no teamwork. It's that we're better and you need to match me. Instead of I can come down to like communicate with you and work through this, it's you follow me. I'm the best. You have to become like me. And this assumption that our generation was the only ones who got it. Like, let's be real, every person thinks their generation is the right generation. Sure. Like, that's kind of why I think it's a little condescending that the greatest generation is called the greatest generation, like even just the name of that. Right. So tribalism, though, it's about tearing others down to feel better about self. Okay. So it's tearing, like I talk about this a lot, that like there are really two ways to get ahead. You either work your butt off in preparation and growth and taking risks, or you tear people down. Right. So there's one of those ways. Tribalism is tearing people down. So
you either rise to the level of other people,
that's right,
or you grab the people and you bring them down to your level.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Or you push them down so that you look elevated. Right.
Right. Yeah. It's part of the pulling down. Yeah.
Yep. So that's where I think tribalism, it's the fact that like you'll see this, that people just can't say a good thing about a generation without saying a bad too. Right? Like why do we always have to have a negative to say alongside it? Like anytime I'll hear, well, the millennials though, like when they get it, they really go, and you're like, yeah, but they never show up on time. Like, okay, well that's tribalism, because what you're trying to do is demonize something in order to glorify another thing. And sometimes we need to be able to just see the benefits of things and see how do we creatively use their strengths that are their strengths Yeah, we want to help people grow in weaknesses, but I'll tell you the best way not to do that. To go up to someone and be like, "You're horrible. Can I help you grow?" No, nobody is ever going to have built trust to allow them to spend that kind of critical information or critical criticism on me for me to now want to grow with you or to think
Yeah,
you're right.
yeah, and can I say, as we're talking about this mindset, right? This tribal mindset is really what kind of tears down your business from the inside out. Blake said something there that that we often will say from one human to another is you always or you never.
Mm,
No one always is in the nevers.
nope.
We're not that perfect. We're not perfect enough to
Mm,
always and never.
yep.
So if you can just realize that, then realize that yes, has a certain generation got a bad reputation because a lot of them in the public eye have shown themselves to be X or whatever, to be lazy or to be condescending or to be know-it-alls. Yeah, we can all acknowledge that. But just because that's the popular demand headline news,
Mm,
when it comes to a generation doesn't mean that all of them are always like that,
yeah.
or none of them are never like that.
Hmm.
So I think if we can get ourselves in that mindset, there's so many. I've been learning so much recently. I'm going to just be vulnerable with you a second about the power of mindset
Mm,
and how it affects your business and really how it affects everything, including your bottom line. And I think if you can get on board with this idea that always and never is not a real thing,
yeah, that's good.
it's not a real thing. The sooner you can get on board with that, the sooner you can begin to go, okay, well then how can I learn?
Yep.
Okay, well then how can I grow then?
Yeah.
Um, and we begin to look to each other. We begin to look at different generations for things. I have people in my life that are 10 years older than me for a very specific reason.
Hmm.
I have people in my life that are 10 years younger than me
Yep.
for a very specific reason. That's super, super intentional for me. I
Yeah.
surround myself with those different generations, and I don't want to give away the whole podcast yet. I'm getting on a rant, but I just want to say, just get rid of always and never.
Yeah.
So how can we start to change? I think I got into it a little bit already. I want to talk about how we can change this mindset in ourselves and our team. I would step one, start there. Wasn't in our show notes, but get rid of always and never. I
Yeah.
also want to point out that Blake says this in his book. He says the key to use our generational differences as assets and grow a shared sense of social identity as a culture that we can consider ours.
Mm,
Let me say that again. The key is to use our generational differences as assets and grow a shared sense of social identity as a culture that we can consider ours. Do you see the inclusion, the we? And we're not saying you have to be tolerant and acceptance of everything. We're just saying it's an inclusion of we are in this together.
yeah.
Your boss may have hired you and someone 20 years younger or 20 years older than you, and now you guys have to work together. Now it's no longer a we, it's no longer a us and them.
Hmm.
By nature, you're now in an our situation.
Yeah.
So Blake, talk to us about that situation.
Yeah, and we want to exactly, and we want to celebrate differences. Like I think that one of the biggest misconstrued ideas here about culture is that we're all the same. We're not. Like different personalities, different experiences, different social standings if you will. All that stuff plays to good growth and good
Mhm.
team culture. And so these different generational um differences are important to lean on. And I was definitely, and I want to make sure I kind of curve this one here. I was making it sound like, oh, the older people say all these things about the youngers. No, the youngers are very like back at them. You know what I mean? Like the younger
Mhm.
generations have this concept that if it's not new, it's not real. And instead of being able to say, oh my goodness, there is a legacy and an understanding that what got us where we are today to even do half of this stuff has come on the backs of these older generations that
Yeah.
really innovated and created and have gone through crazy amounts of war and all these other things that we'll talk about. But they there is this lack of like that's where the tribalism and the disconnect happens for these younger generations. We've got to celebrate the differences. Differences are good evolutions too. And so as
Mhm.
we're going and growing, differences and thinkings help us to evolve to a transformational growth, not it's totally different. What was starting to grow into a dog is now a dolphin. It's not what we're doing here. We're growing from a dog to a wolf to you know what I'm saying? Like there is a likeness still that has to be built on the backs of others' generations. Our future has to be built on those backs. Okay. So I don't know. The thing I think about with this and this mindset that we've got to overcome is that what you think about people matters. What you think about people, whether it's another generation, I don't even know, just all these differences, how you think about them, if you're trying to ignore the differences or that they're not real or that they're always going to be the negative, it will play to this hard. And I think about there was this, and I don't remember what book I heard this in, but it's really good. There was this test that Robert Rosenthal gave. It was called the Harvard test of inflected acquisition. Can't believe I remember that off the cuff.
Killer.
And what it was is he would go in to these elementary schools and he would do this test with these kids. And then he would come to the teacher and say, hey, what this test is about is to try to predict the high performers in our generations and in our world who are going to be those next level people. And so what this is about is we're going to give them this test. And then they would come and say, hey, the top 3 people in this were Johnny, Sally, and David. Okay. And Johnny, Sally, and David scored so high. We need you to not say anything to them. We're going to test them at the end of the year, but we just want to make sure, it still rings true. And so sure enough, at the end of the year, they took the test again. Johnny, Sally, and David, top of the score again. The thing that was different was this whole test was kind of a ruse. It wasn't actually set up to prove this. The test was just an IQ test that they slapped a cover page on. And the only thing true was that the people who scored the highest the second time were those people, Johnny, Sally, and David, but they weren't necessarily the ones who scored it the first time. And what Robert Rosenthal, and this was, I think, back in the 60s. Okay, so this isn't some new test that a lot of people might question. This was like even back in the 60s here. I think you can fact check me. I don't remember, but it was a while back. And his whole purpose of this was to show that the belief that the teacher had on the students impacted how the students did. Johnny and Sally and David didn't score high the first time, but they were told they did. And so their assumption about them, the time they gave them to grow in things, the extra help they gave them, impacted greatly their future. And so I bring this up because our mindset about these other generations, when we come to a place of empathy and can understand why they are what they are, we treat them differently. Just education and knowledge about these other generations will cause you to treat them different. And I think that's what we've got to step into, Dustin, is that ability to start changing that first.
Yeah, and that's a good segue in, because you have a kind of some listings in your book. I love how practical your book is, because you kind of went through some things there of like, let's break down how each of these generations kind of how they function. And I think that really helped to get rid of some generalities and stereotypes and ignorance, really, about generations that aren't us. And so you kind of walk through these things of how to seek to understand each generation better. I like the word seek in that, because it's active and not passive. I think we oftentimes will find ourselves in an office setting or a shop floor or something like that, and we'll go, well, I have to be around this person for 40 to 50 hours a week. And so whatever I need to know about them, I'll see it unfold. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you never take the time to really ask them at your lunch break or at the water cooler or at, beers after work. You never really take the time to really kind of understand where they're coming from. But if you did, then a whole lot more would make sense to you, and I can guarantee you a whole lot less would be frustrating for you. So, Blake, why don't you walk us through just kind of the general
Yeah.
categories of what we should be seeking to understand with each generation?
Yeah. So I'll probably just focus on a few of them, if that's cool. Like the
Yeah,
book goes
great.
into a lot more detail, but I think
Mhm.
there are three areas that are really significant. And so I kind of want to hit them. I might be grouping a
Let's do it.
couple things here, but the first one's going to be how they struggle and what's shaped them. Okay. Because that matters a lot. How they view work and believe growth in a company happens, because it just, in your mind, you might have just heard that and been like, well, it happens the way I believe it happens, right? Okay, that's the problem. Okay, that's one of our problems, is that you believe it happens a certain way, but not every generation believes that. And then the
Mm,
last thing I'd like to talk about is how they define loyalty, because
yeah,
that's pretty interesting. So I'll probably just go down the line, boomers to Gen Zs, if you're cool with that.
yeah,
Um,
that's it.
so boomers, they've experienced the Vietnam War, like the civil rights movement, the women's right movement, sexual reformation, space travel, moon landings, so much more. We don't think about all that. We just think they're old. That's it. And that's how your mind goes, well, they're just old. They're not into technology. They're not about change. Are you kidding me? If they're not about change, it's because they experienced so much that they got to a place of comfort that they didn't want it to be so overwhelming that their life was
Mm,
always about all these things. Okay.
yeah,
And also, anywhere we're starting here, they are experiencing all the next things that every other generation experienced too. Right. So now boomers, what they experience, they also experience what Gen Xers experience, what millennials are experiencing, and what Gen Zs are experiencing.
mm,
So legitimately, they were promised the American dream and never got it. That's rough. That's
yeah,
real rough. They sought after it. They sought after this idea for a long time, and the majority of them are still fighting today. So that's rough. Gen Xers, they experienced the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Challenger disaster, the Watergate scandal, large corporate layoffs, extreme stock market decline, rise of personal computer, energy crisis, and the dot-com boom. That's a lot. That's a lot of change. And I know I'm building on top of this, but I think it's important for us to see that this isn't like, it's not like we all haven't experienced stuff, you know? And I
mhm,
think that one thing I'll hear older generations say about youngers is that they just haven't experienced any hard things. Well,
mm,
millennials got school shootings, the 9/11 incident, terrorist attacks. And remember, these things are happening as those generations are very impressionable.
yeah,
Okay. Did 9/11 and the terrorist attacks hit millennials in a different way than it hit boomers? Probably. Boomers have experienced a lot of this stuff. Maybe they're a little callous to some of it. And I'm not saying that it didn't affect them. That's not fair at all. But it's hitting impressionable. I remember how it hit me as a
yeah,
middle schooler at the time. It was rough. I was like, I don't even know what to think and how to respond to this. But it was moving, right? We
yeah,
saw millennials saw the housing market recession happen, the internet massive expansion, social media rise. It doesn't sound like a big deal. It is changing the way our brains act and move. It's not good. I mean, and there are good things about it, but it is changing a ton of our brains. Gen Z's terrorism, prolonged wars. This generation, this is crazy to think. They've never not experienced a war.
mm,
Doesn't feel like it to you because chances are your definition of a war is very different than theirs. But they're experiencing increased gun violence in the media. They're seeing everything that's happening everywhere all at once. Boomers didn't have that early on. You didn't see everything. It's our technology has advanced at such a rate that the thing that is happening in the moment we can now see today. How
mm,
is that affecting us? Well, it's keeping us in a place of stress. So this generation believes on having a stance or participating in social justice, corporate gender equality, climate change, and social responsibility at a world global level that nobody else has had to experience up to this point. It's
mm,
happened. We've gone in steps again, and the boomers are experiencing it today. But I think there's a lot of older generations who are just write these kind of things off that are very important to the struggles that have shaped these other younger generations.
yeah.
You have any thoughts on that, the struggles and what shaped them?
No, I just like what you're alluding to, and you kind of flat out said a couple times, is just to understand that we've all been through some things.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that these things that you pointed out as well, that these things are coming in the formidable years,
Mm.
impressionable years.
Yeah.
Right. We know through science now that the human brain isn't fully developed until the age of 26.
Mm.
So if that's the case, think about all the things in the first 26 years of your life that formed who you are. It's
Mm.
really no different if you're 30 years older than me or 30 years younger than me. It's all still impactful.
Mm.
And it might just be different because a younger generation didn't have to walk in the snow to school uphill both ways, but they
Yeah.
did have to worry about getting shot when they got there.
Yeah.
You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Well said. Well
So,
said. I think this takes us to the next part,
okay.
because obviously this podcast is about helping culture within organizations, right? And help building teams. And so this next one's how they view work and believe that growth in a company happens. So boomers see work as a long-term career, and then you retire. The amount of stories that I hear of boomers who are like, I started this job X amount of years ago, and I grew up through the corporate ladder, through my, you know, experience, and I believe that seniority is how I grow, and I'm retiring from this place. Okay. They believe you grow by experience. They believe that this is an interesting one. They tend to believe it's more time-based experience. It's
Hmm.
seniority, it's rank. RHIP, I think, came from this generation. Rank has its privileges, right? Like I've heard it a ton. So they think growth is more through that hierarchy type of way. That's okay. That's the way it's always been for them. That was the way it was as they were growing up. They believed it, they accepted it. Gen Xers view work more like a contract. Okay. Xers believe, and by the way, as I'm saying all these things, these are like high level generalities. I get that. Not every person in these generations is this thing. Okay. So just like Dustin was saying, always and nevers, that's not what we're saying here. This is more just a generalization of the generation at large. Nobody probably perfectly exemplifies one of these things. Okay.
Hmm.
Xers believe that growing your skills will lead to the next position or job. Interesting. So now it's about like being the superhero who keeps adding things onto them to become that person who can go do those things. They're proactive about their career growth, not necessarily the company's growth.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's Gen Xers. Millennials, they view more work more as a holistic idea. Okay. And I know a lot of people are probably like, all right, here we go, fluffy words. Okay. I know. But they believe it more as a holistic idea. They want the flexibility to flow in and out of work as more of a result focused rather than a time focused. Okay. Millennials don't see the monetary of doing something over and over as valuable to their growth. Like they believe it's very YouTube in this sense. As soon as I learn it, I know it. Why do I have to do this a million times to believe that that thing is real? Not saying that's
Mm.
right or wrong, but it is a thought process that as soon as they do something once, they believe they should get paid the same amount that their parents did who've done it for 30 years.
Mm.
It's interesting concept there. Um, Gen Zs enjoy working around others in an immersive way, and they're very self reliant. Okay. I feel like Gen Zers and Gen Xers are kind of similar, which makes sense because Xers kids most likely are Zers. But I do see a lot of that same like focus about growth being the results you get very similar to millennials, but actually through specialization. This is why
Mm.
Gen Zers tend to be people who have great hard skills and very poor soft skills because they're just getting to the meat. They just want to deal with the thing. I'm going to grow through a company as I am specialized in that area.
Mm.
So, and the thing I really like about Gen Zers is that they believe growth also comes through failure. And I feel like it was one of the first generations really to grab a hold and accept that. And I think that probably leads to why, 13% of them are already reporting, being self employed because they're willing to make failures and kind of move on. So
Yeah,
any thoughts
willing
on
to take
that?
risks. Yeah, just willing to take risks. I found it interesting as you were talking and you got to my age group, and I'm like, yeah, I guess I see that, and I see the similarities too in boomers and X, just as you see the similarities in, sorry, boomers and Y,
Yeah, millennials.
and then X and Z's.
Hmm.
You can kind of start to see those tendencies. I find that super interesting because I think that if those generations got together in a room or went and had beers after work together, they'd really hit it off.
Yeah. Yep.
So if you're in a Gen Z or listening to this right now, I'd encourage you to go find a Gen Xer and
Have a
take them to
beer.
lunch.
Yeah.
Have a beer. Yep.
Yeah. That's good. I like it. So the last area I think it's important to look at is how they define loyalty. Because one of the things I hear a ton is that these younger generations just aren't loyal. And I think it's we just use really ambiguous terms in the way we define things. This is why
Mm,
the word God is not a good word to try to use when expressing what you're thinking. Because the
yeah.
word God means something very different to different religions,
So
different
different.
experiences, different life altering moments. It means something completely different. And so that's why it's not really a good word to use. I think loyalty is that way too. I
Mm,
think boomers, when you think about loyal, they are loyal to the company they work for. They
yeah.
love to identify with the vision and mission of that company because it's like an extension of themselves. And boomers are loyal to duty and to teamwork. And I know
Yeah.
that a lot of people might be like, no, every boomer I've ever met has fought me and blah, blah, blah. They are so loyal. They are their teamwork aspect. It may not look like the way younger generations think about teamwork, but they want to be engaged. Like if you don't CC them on everything you do via email, they're going to be offended because they feel like you're trying to hide something from them or go around them
Mm,
or and you're not. You're just trying to communicate with someone. But if they're supposed to be involved at any level, it'll be offensive to them. And
yeah.
so it's because the teamwork is the teamwork, right? Like it's everyone working together here. Gen Xers are loyal to their career growth, kind of like what we talked about. They're less loyal to a company or an authority. They are more faithful to someone who cares for their career growth holistically. So
Yeah. It's all
they
about the resume.
exactly, and they will find loyalty within companies and larger organizations because there was a big boom of like massive organizations happening around their time, Gen Xers, and so they found people who invested in them and they stuck with them. They probably
Mm,
jumped to multiple companies with that person because they
mm,
found a loyalty to that person who invested in their development.
yeah.
Okay. This is good. Millennials, they care about being loyal to the idea of why of a company.
Mm,
So millennials care about being loyal to the collaboration within the team that they're brought to. So like if a company all of a sudden did something super immoral, millennials will probably leave
yeah.
because they think that by buying into being around this thing, I am identifying with it. So there is an
Mm,
identity loyalty to it. And when they
mm,
see things, they're very quick to jump and run. But they tend to be incredibly faithful to like a manager who cares about their development, not just like how's that different from Xers and millennials. How's that different? Xers, it's about their career growth. Millennials, they're looking to be parented. Every millennial probably just vomited a little. And I'm not saying that you have to be a parent, but I think there is an aspect of that parenting is in this because of what they've lacked, not because we
yeah.
should be. And that's the thing. Like, do I think that companies should be parents? Hell no. I think parents should be parents,
Yeah.
but they didn't. And we can either complain about kids these days, or we can step into a place and start helping them with development through their humanity and
Mm,
help them understand what it is to show up on time and why that's important and what that says. Even just having conversations, not in an accusatory way, but in a way that two people are just talking to each other. Okay.
yeah.
And lastly, Gen Zs. Gen Zs are loyal to the experience and the authentic interaction. That sounds weird. Okay. They are authentic to the experience they're getting. They want to live life. I think you said in a past podcast, Dustin, that Gen Zs are just saying all the things everybody else has wanted to say. They're just saying them out loud. They want
Yeah.
the experience of life. And so they're loyal to that. They're very loyal to an interactive manager who gives them a beyond the workplace experience. Okay. Like, I know that sounds corny, but they're looking for that kind of a thing. They're faithful to an authentic workplace experience.
Yeah. Yeah, all really good stuff, and there's a whole lot more just like that in his book. But I do want, as we kind of come to a close here today, I do want to get us into this key question that we asked at the very beginning, and that's, how does all of this information actually affect the bottom dollar? How does it affect the bottom line? And one thing that Blake said in his book, and I'll read this and then I'll let him kind of answer this question, is that we must intentionally set them, meaning the generations, we must intentionally set them up to plow the ground for us.
Mm.
So, how does generational differences affect our bottom dollar, Blake?
Well, if we just even look at what is real today and how we're about to see 20% of our workforce retire, these younger generations are what we're going to have. When you have organizations that are completely siloed and are not communicating, they're not talking, they're not working together, you are losing so much money. You're losing so much money. Just increasing your level of productivity 3 to 5% could be in the form of millions of dollars added just by having productivity increase at that much. Just that. Because anytime we try to grow revenue, like, oh, let's increase our revenue, your expenses grow with it. Anytime we try to cut expenses, our productivity drops. Anytime you can just increase collaboration, you win. You
Yeah,
win.
that's the key word there. I want to be sure that people hear that we're not just saying like, "Hey, if you can fix your generational differences, that all of a sudden your productivity will go up." It's about them being able to work together,
Yeah.
right? It's the same thing. You can tell it when you watch, the NBA or the NFL. You can tell when there's a team that's playing together versus a team that's out there because they're in a contract year and they have to make themselves look the best.
Yep.
Those teams don't make it. Those teams don't make it to the Super Bowl. And as business owners and leaders, we're trying to get to the Super Bowl. Every day is a Super Bowl, right? We're trying to get to that point. And so collaboration is the connection point.
Yeah.
That's the connection point in how we connect generational differences to the bottom line. If we can't work together, we can't win together. And if you
Yeah.
can't win together, there's no bottom line. It just goes down,
Yeah.
not up.
And innovation. You're not going to get good innovation within your company by one generational perspective. And I mean that even with the youngest, you're not going to get it. And I see this happen a lot. They think, oh, we need to be more innovative. And then they get a whole bunch of young generations to think they're going to get innovation. They don't understand what's got them where they are. They make assumptions, and that's okay because they're still growing. But when you get all generations into a room to solve a problem, you're picking from experiences and different perspectives and what's important, what's not important. You're knocking down things left and right and getting rid of the fuzziness around an idea and getting down to a heart. So that's why, like, you're going to enhance your collaboration and innovation. You're going to have increased team member engagement. We've heard statistic after statistic that when people are engaged in the company, profits just blow out of the water. You're going to have higher productivity. You're going to have better decision making because people trust one another, because people feel like they can be vulnerable, because people will give when they feel like they've been seen. And when I
Yeah,
feel
and
like I've been seen, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say I was gonna get to that when you were talking about innovation. Innovation is an extremely vulnerable thing to venture into,
Yeah.
and there has to be a high trust factor that when I say an idea, there's a 90% chance it's going to be a bad idea, and I want to know that I'm confident enough to do that without my coworkers and my leaders shaming me for a bad idea.
Yeah.
But rather than coming alongside and go, yeah, but also what if, you know what I mean? Like that type of trust is what breeds that innovation, which affects your bottom dollar.
Yeah, man, that needs to be a t-shirt. 90% bad decisions, 100% innovation. Like,
I
that is
like it.
good, man.
I like it.
I think you're also very similar. We're going to have effective knowledge sharing. People are, when they trust, they're going to give information without feeling like they have to hold it, because there's this mindset that the more knowledge I have, the more I'm going to grow and the more valuable I am. And therefore, I'm not going to share knowledge.
Yep.
The more we share knowledge, the more everyone grows. And the more everyone grows, the more you can continue to grow. And so we're not just like, well, let's just stop all growth because I just want to be here forever. There are those mindsets, okay? But we're not wanting those. But you're going to see like improved retention. You're going to see attraction start to come to these, like to your team. People are going to be like, I want to work for that team because they get things. They're both innovative. They're looking at younger generations, but they're also understanding that the things that have just proved across all these generational time periods, they're still holding on to those things. And I want to be a part of something like that.
Yeah. I love what you said there at the end as we close, because our next episode, we're going to be talking about something that I think bridges that gap even more. You talked about how healthy generational differences and embracing those differences and growing together reduces retention.
Increases
retention, reduces turnover is what I meant to say.
Yep.
Reduces turnover. So next episode, we're going to talk about the cost of turnover. So many people and leaders and businesses have a faint idea, but not a real idea, not a real concrete number on what it costs them every time they turn over a position. And so we're going to dive deep into that. But before we go, I want to remind you to buy Blake's book. It's called Uncultured. You can find it on Amazon, anywhere books are sold, kind of thing. So Blake Behr, Behr, Uncultured. We'll put the link in the show notes for you as well. Also, coming up on August 31st, the last Thursday of the month, we have our think tank sessions in which we're going to talk more about these generational differences. Blake is going to be there to lead the conversation, and we want to hear from you. We want to hear from you about what generational differences you're experiencing in your company. And let's work through those things together. Let's learn from each other and sharpen each other as we grow. So we can't wait to be with you on that next episode, The Cost of Turnover. Until then, we'll talk to you next time on the Culture Based Podcast.